It's fun to find something that you didn't anticipate, and that is maintaining a relationship with another woman. So a number of the men talked about having a visit, and Sally is there visiting them, and the correction officer comes to tell them that Susan is here. What you gonna do? And they started, they were laughing, and they had a lot of fun with this because they felt that the correction officers were really taking a lot of pleasure out of them being in this dilemma. But some of this maintaining relationship with a number of women has a lot to do with the fact that they know that these relationships are very vulnerable to disruption, and that you need to try to have a number of women who are interested in you and willing to write you, visit you, send money to your commissary account, etc. So it's almost a necessity to try to have more than one woman while you're incarcerated. Trying to control women from the outside is another way that they felt. From the inside is another way that they felt that men generate conflict. Harassing women, threatening women. And the most important of all is a direct accusation of accusing the woman of being unfaithful or having what they refer to as a second life. We asked them about how the wives and girlfriends cause conflict while in prison. And my co-author of this report is Dr. Creasy Finney-Harrison at the University of Illinois, Chicago, and she came up with this phrase to characterize our thematic findings. She said that these responses are basically, you can synthesize these findings down to unfaithfulness and punitive assertiveness. And probably the best example of this was, I'm breaking up with you and I have a new man. And for these men, this was one of the ways in which their wives or girlfriends were causing conflict, or women coming out to the prison accusing the men of doing something wrong to her while he was in the community, and she's now found out about it, and she's confronting him about this. Some men didn't take this very well. They said, she don't have to come out here on visitation day and tell me about what I'm doing wrong or what I did wrong, etc. I got other things to do. Interesting. Using the man's imprisonment to assert herself. Now that he's incarcerated, she's more willing to tell him really how she feels about his behavior. We asked these men about what kind of conflict do you anticipate encountering when you return to the community. So when you complete your term and you are thinking about going back into the community, what type of conflict do you anticipate encountering with your partner? Earlier I said to you that these men are obsessed with looking for evidence of a second life. And now they're saying the same thing here. Actual evidence that she's been unfaithful, they saw and anticipated would be a source of conflict. Unresolved conflict. And conflict while he was incarcerated, conflict is not resolved. They return to the community, conflict continues to exist. And they saw that as a conflict that they could anticipate. Where women had no desire to reunite with them, that had been exploiting their relatives, that is, from their perspective, using their relatives to get money, using their relatives for transportation and other services, sources of support. They saw that as for men as well. They saw that as a potential source of conflict. Going home to another woman. So, like, if I'm promising two women I'm coming home to one, and I go home to one particular woman, that's going to be a little bit of a problem down the line. Challenging his manhood. Parole restrictions and threats, threatening to inform the parole department or parole officer that they're engaged in behavior that is in violation of their conditions of parole. And that was very problematic. There was a lot of anxiety expressed when they were talking about this, primarily because they realized that if a woman is informing parole that they're engaging in behaviors that are in violation of the conditions, they know that they can be revoked and sent back to prison. And so there was a lot of anxiety. You could just sense that this really could be a major source of conflict that had the potential to escalate into a violent confrontation. We also conducted focus groups with women. We're going to have to kind of run through this a little bit. What was interesting here was that some women did not want to reunite with these men. They've already reunited in the past. many of the women we interviewed had also had a prior period of incarceration as well. But many women indicated they didn't want to reunite, so now we got a problem. The problem we have quite often in domestic violence, regardless of the circumstances. Women want to terminate the relationship and men don't want termination. I'm still trying to understand why it is that when you break up with a woman, she kind of moves on, she has some emotional challenges, and then there's a small group of men who want to engage in acts of violence as a means of responding to the desire of a woman to move on and terminate the relationship. And so this is an issue. Women did not want to reunite with men who were in prison for assaulting them or committing acts of violence against them. Fear of future abuse. A lot of concern on the part of the women that men would get back into the streets. And one of the things that we came up with was that when men were in prison, they were basically promise makers. And when they returned to the community, they were promise breakers. And one of the most concrete sort of manifestations of breaking those promises was returning to street life, whether it was hanging around with criminal peers, hanging out in certain street settings, using drugs, selling drugs, engaging in other patterns of criminality, etc. We asked the women about some of the challenges of maintaining a relationship during incarceration. They talked about accusations of infidelity, men demanding money from them, or demanding that they visit more often. Some women talked about the fact that when he calls, he doesn't express any interest in the children. He's really trying to catch up with what I'm doing in the community. And where a woman no longer wants a relationship, but the partner does. We asked the women about when a man comes home, what are some of the challenges. They talked about the fact that when men come home, he has no source of income, it becomes an additional burden. They also talked about the fact that when men come home, they bring with them sort of that suspiciousness and paranoia that exists in the prison where no one can be trusted, and that's a carryover into their relationships with their partners. They also talked about his parole status being limited. The women even identified the need that the men, more than a wife or a girlfriend, they need a mother, and they identified that as well. And I have to go back to this. We compared the men and women, and we found that there were a number of areas in which they sort of confirmed each other's responses. One was that it's difficult maintaining a relationship during and following a man's incarceration. We also found that men and women agreed that relationships become very vulnerable to disruption, and both the men and women also identified the role of promises in keeping women engaged or invested in these relationships. I'm not going to be able to finish my entire presentation, but I have a series of slides that show the power and control implications of the relationship dynamics. And that is, I'm taking the power and control wheel that's used in domestic violence intervention and showing how coercion and intimidation and male privilege are manifested in the thematic responses of these men and women as relates to addressing the intersection of prison reentry and domestic violence. Basically, what we're calling for here is that in order to enhance reentry planning, in order to have a comprehensive prisoner reentry plan, not only must there be concern with addressing substance abuse and employment and shelter, that greater attention needs to be devoted to looking at relationship conflict. And it is interesting to note that the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services is now supporting some family strengthening initiatives around the country. It's about 221 programs that have been funded, but 13 of them are family reunification programs that are being operated in prisons. And the whole purpose there is to expose these men, incarcerated men, and their partners to some relationship